Hello and welcome to another tutorial. So this time around we are going to be making a gravity gun. So we're going to be making something where we can point at something off in the distance, where we can grab it and pull it towards us, and also where we can then, once we've got that held, that we can launch that flying, or that we could point at something on the ground and impart some force to it. So that's going to be what we're going to be focusing on getting set up. So as our starting point, we do have this is roughly my first person template project. So we've already got a rigid body based character controller and it's using the new input system. So we've got this as our starting point. And if you're looking for the template project for this, I'll check a link to that in the description below as well. It's a full template project that you can use for any of your own projects. So we've got the ability already to move around, to jump, things like that. And what we're going to do is set up so that we have our gravity gun. So a couple of things we're going to need to start off with. So I'm not going to focus too much on what the appearance is of necessarily the gravity gun, things like that. I want to focus on the mechanical aspects for it. So let's get the key things we need set up to begin with. So firstly, let's set up our folders here. So we're going to have our gravity gun, and we're going to, with this, we will definitely have a folder for our scripts, and we'll also have one for material, because that's something where, again, you want to make sure in a game that you've got a clear visual language for the player of here is something that is operable or interactable with via a gravity gun. So some kind of clear visual language with that. The kind of exception where you can get away with not having that is if you have something sort of like your Half-Life 2, where kind of everything is, and it's very much down to the particular scale. But even then, there's still a visual language in that you quickly get a sense of, based upon the weight that we would assume something to be, whether we're going to be able to interact with it. But in our case, we're going to use some color coding of stuff. Gravity target, and I'm going to set up a few cubes, which we're going to position these all over here. And what I'm going to do is have a few different sizes of cubes. So we'll give them all a consistent material, which I'm just going to make that be something that really sort of stands out. And I want essentially 3 different sizes. I want a small, medium, and large object. And these will all have different weights. So cube, small, cube, medium, and cube, large. So our medium one, we're going to drop the scale on that. And that looks pretty good. We'll also get these positioned a bit more evenly, just so it's all nicely lined up. So that's going to be the medium. The small, we might make even tinier, maybe like a 0.25. It's probably good. So then that one's going to be able to be -12. And another at -3. So just all different sizes of ones, and then the large cube, -3 and -8. So 3 different sizes. So we'll attach a rigid body to each of these. So this is something that, because we're going to be going via the physics system, any of our ones are going to need a rigid body on them. So small, we'll leave at 1 kilo. Medium, I'm going to make that 5 kilos. And large, I'm going to make that 20 kilos. So that's good. We've got our different cubes that are going to be viable targets. I'm going to also put these in another layer. Now we don't necessarily need to do this, but I think this is a handy thing of being able to group these targets. because we are going to need to be doing some ray casting, things like that. So really helpful if we can actually have these be able to be searched for a little bit more efficiently. So that's good. We've got our different targets. I want to be able to track where I'm aiming though. So that's something where it'd be nice if I could have a reticle, and I'd really just need it in the center of the screen. So there's a really cheap and easy way to do this where we add in some UI and we add in a UI image. Now it's going to default to trying to add it to an existing canvas. So what I'm going to do is create a new canvas first. This again, on my usual scaling with screen size. And this is, we generally have more stuff on the HUD than this, but this will be the HUD canvas. Now the HUD doesn't need to be interacted with, so I'm actually going to remove the raycaster. I don't want anything to actually be a raycast target on the HUD. Then I'm going to, under this, set up an image. This will be the reticle. Again, turn off it being a raycast target. Now source image, I'm going to take the easy way out and use, there is already the knob there, which we can drop the size of that. So something probably more like 25 by 25. If we bring the game window up, we can see that looks reasonable. And we can just apply a decent amount of transparency there. So it gives us a reticle. We've got a center point there now, which is good. So, okay, we've got our reticle. We have the different cubes there. We need to actually create our gravity gun sort of mounting point. So again, I'm not going to focus too much on the visual mesh for the gravity gun because that's not really the priority. I want to focus on the mechanics. So what I'm going to do is set this up as we'll create an empty object here, and this is going to be my equipment anchor. And if I go to the scene view, then I can see where the equipment anchor is. So it's off there in the center. So bring it over to the side, probably something like 0.35 and a little bit forward, given just the radius and everything of the character. So that's good. I'll bring my game view down here again so I can easily see this. So then I want to create a couple of things for the gravity gun. Now I need to be, because this is going to be something that's moving, there'll be rotation scale applying here. What I'm going to do is there will be a gravity gun object, and that's going to have the script on it. So that will have gravity gun. Now that gravity gun script, what I will then do is it's going to, underneath it, have the mesh. So splitting the mesh off from the actual main object is a very intentional thing that I'm wanting to do here. So 3D object wise, I'm just going to attach a cylinder. Now, obviously, initially that is ridiculous in size. So this will be the mesh. Doesn't need a collider on it. And I obviously need to rotate it. So we've rotated it, that's good. Scale of it is obviously quite large at the moment, so we need to fix that scale up. So we've made it that it is a bit of a better scale there. Shorten it a bit. So that's pretty good so far. Probably can reduce that a bit further again, and we offset it forwards. So not in Y, it would be probably along Z. So like that. So that's pretty good. Our equipment anchor, we can lower that a bit because that's way too high currently. And we can probably bring that back a little bit as well. So we end up with it being positioned like that. Now, obviously, there's other stuff we could be doing with this to refine that positioning, but that works pretty well. we need to have an anchor point, because when we pull stuff towards us, it's going to have to anchor somewhere. So what we'll do is create an empty object, and this will just be the anchor for things that are grabbed. And we can just bring that forward. We want that to be offset a little bit, so probably something like maybe like 0.6. Probably feels about right. We'll be doing a couple of things, maybe 0.55. We'll do a couple of things to make that dynamic, but the key thing is we've got that offset a bit. So, okay, we've got our reticle, we've got our mesh, we have our gravity gun script that we'll attach. So we're nearly ready to be setting this up. We need to think about how we want this to be operated control-wise. So if we take a look at the input setup for the character, we have our input config, and we've already got a fire option. Now, fire, currently, it will send just a thing for essentially when it's pressed. So it isn't going to give us a press and release, it will just give us a press. But what we can do is in interactions, add in press, and then we say press and release. That means we'll get an event for both. Then we need a secondary, because we want to have not just the primary, we also want to have a secondary fire. So this I will call secondary. And then we need to remap the different triggers that we might be using. So rather than it being the right trigger on the gamepad, we could switch that over to being something like the left trigger. With the mouse, we can switch that to being the right button. So we just update these different ones. Touch screen, there's not really going to be a good analog for it. So we will get rid of touchscreen for the XR controllers. That's something where, if we take a look with that, we've already got the sort of primary actions that we had there. We can check and see for, that would be something where we'd probably be looking at, we could either use the sort of secondary action, things like that. So we've got the primary. So if I look for secondary, there's generic secondary actions for any of the things. So there's a bunch of ones we could hook up there. For now, because we're not focusing on VR, and this is something where these are very much specific to your game. So I'm going to focus on just getting the key bits set up there. So we've got fire, we've got secondary. Both of those we get events for press and release. So we need to hook stuff up for being able to react to those. So there's a couple little changes we need in the character motor. Now there's already a bunch of stuff here for input that's already happening. It's already have things for like on jump, stuff like that. So what I can do is I would set up ones here for public void on fire, input value, and then we'll also have void on secondary. And again, these names are ones that you can adjust them to your specific setup. And what I would do is I will have a unity event for on, fire, and this will be it beginning and then it being released. So on fire begin, and that's a new unity event. We will also have for the secondary as well. So we'll have on secondary. And I might actually call these primary and secondary, I think is some better naming there. And that will be primary end and secondary end. So it's just this little bit of wiring up that we need to do first. We can then check if it's pressed, then we send our on primary. Otherwise, we send the end one. And for then the secondary, we just send the other events. So it's just about us getting a couple of these little things connected up so that we can then easily be focusing just on the gravity gun script. So we've got these, we'll just place these up the top here. So we've got our various weapon events, which is great. Then what I will do is I'll go to the gravity gun and I'll set up just the one so I can do all the wiring up in the inspector. And we're not too far off of being able to have this actually be launching stuff. So on primary begin, we'll have an on primary end, because the idea here is that we fire the gravity gun and that pulls it towards us. So on primary end. So primary is used for grabbing and secondary is used for launching. So on secondary, in, and we'll have then a on secondary end. So that looks good. So we're able to wire these up, so we'll just get everything all wired up and ready to go for it, which will be great. So these, we connect these up from here on our character controller. So we can see our different primary ones. We link those up, connect those up to the gravity gun. Now, if we had multiple bits of equipment, weapons, things like that we were wiring up, we'd have probably a base object and we would have an interface there with the character where it's going and querying the particular weapon that it's talking to. In our case, because we're focusing just on the core sort of setup, we'll directly manually link things up, but that's how we'd structure things if we did have multiple bits of equipment that we could be equipping or that we could be swapping between. So there we go, and secondary end. Excellent. So that's the wiring up on the character all done. Now we focus on the gravity gun script. So the first thing we're going to do is actually focus on getting it being able to launch things. That's going to be our starting point, because that's actually the easier one to get up and running. So there's a couple of common things that we're going to need. So we're going to need that anchor point. We will, not all of these we'll be using immediately, but it's handy just to get these set up. We need to also have, because we put stuff in a particular layer, we want to be able to configure what layers it checks. So I'm going to have a layer mask for the target mask, and I'm just going to default that to everything. So it just means that it's an easy way of, it will by default will map to everything, but then we can refine which particular layers. So that's good. I really want to be able to indicate the charge level, because when we are launching something, I want to be able to hold down the secondary, and the longer I hold it down for, the more of a force it's going to exert when I release it. So I'm going to have the support here for we'll set up using TM Pro, and I want to be able to specifically just say the charge level somewhere. So charge display, and then we'll also need a couple of other things then specifically for the launching. So the push or launch effect. Well, one of the things that I know I'm going to need is, because I want that ramping up of the force, so I want the min push force. Let's make that 10. I want to have the max push force, which we might say that that's 100. And we could go for then our charge rate. So push charge rate. So this will be how rapidly it builds up a charge. So if I go for something like 0.2, then it would take 5 seconds for it to fully charge up. We could have that also be non-linear. There's different things we could be doing there with it. I want to have a max range. because we don't want this to be necessarily able to be shoving things on the far side of the map. So I will have a max push target range. Let's make it pretty generous to start with, 30 meters. And although we likely won't be messing with this, I kind of want to make it that I can easily change the force mode. So push force mode, and we'll default that to, so we've got different ones we can be using. I want mass to be taken into account, but the reason for exposing this is that means then that we have something where if we want to be able to have it not take into account mass, we easily can. It's just a setting change. So it lets us easily experiment. So this is going to focus purely on the secondary. And so when the secondary is pressed, we want to not look for a target at that point, but we want to start charging essentially our push. So we want to start building that up. So we need to keep track of if we're charging. So bool, charging push. We need a charge progress. Then what we would do is in secondary begin, well, charging push goes to true. Charge progress, that is going to be reset to 0. So that's all we do with the secondary begin. We zero it out, and then we start actually building it up. Then in update, well, F charging push. Then we need to build that up. So push our charge level for that. So let's make sure we rename that push charge progress. So that is going to be, we clamp that from 0 to 1. And what we do is we take our charge progress, we add our push charge rate multiplied by time.delta time. And we can constrain this where we only actually do that charging if it's less than 100%. So, and push charge progress is less than 1. Then we update it. And you could also set up mechanics there where if when it hits 1, that maybe it has like an overheat thing where after a time it then just forces it to expend the charge. You could easily wire in things like that. What I will do is I will update the text. So that's something where I just want to make sure the text is up to date whenever it's charging. So we've got a nice clear sort of display of that. So that I have my charge display, which the charge display should actually be down in common. So it's text, easily done. We just update this to be push charge progress by 100, which I'll just put that in brackets so I can guarantee that it's properly calculating it. So that's good. We're charging it up. Then, well, what if we want to, what happens when we want to release that charge? So, okay, well, we can easily update that. What we do is when secondary ends, so we're working with a physics system, and it'd be kind of good to keep anything physics within physics. So we could set up release or perform push. Perform push is false. And again, this is something where what we do is we set this to false here, and then in secondary end, we set that to true, because then I can do everything for the physics related stuff where it belongs in fixed update. So F charging push and form push. Well, first thing I want to do is clear all of these. I want to update the progress display and just wipe that out. Perform push. So now I'm going to perform the push. Well, I need to work out what I'm actually aiming at. So I need a way for being able to determine my target. And we're going to need this for multiple things. So I want this to be a little bit generic. So I want to set up, okay, well, rigid body, because that's what we have to work with. Find target. And I want to be able to indicate if this is a push or not. Because if it's a push, that might have a different search range to a grab. So if I set up here, header, grab, serialized field, max grab target range. So might want to allow to grab things a little bit further away. So, okay, our search range, if it's a push, then it is going to be the max push target range. Otherwise, it's the max grab target range. I need to then perform a raycast. So raycast for the target. So I'm going to need a hit result. And I want to do my raycast. So physics raycast. And I want to do this because we've got our reticle. So doing this from the camera, and in particular the main camera's position, we use the main camera's direction. So it's transformed forward. Then we have our hit result. So out, hit result. Then we have our search range. And then finally, we have our target mask. So if it hits something, then what I want to do is return hit result, collider, get component for the rigid body. Otherwise, we return null. Now, I could change that to a try get component that's going to be a little bit more efficient. But given we're running this at a pretty low rate, that's not something where I kind of need to be too concerned at this stage with performance for it. But the key thing is, when I go to perform the push here now, I can go, well, find target. It is a push. So rigid body, target RB. So we attempt to find that. So that might have succeeded. So attempt to find target. If target RB is not equal to null, then I can impart force onto it. And that side of it, of imparting the force, is pretty straightforward because what I need to do first is work out the force. So, okay, push force is going to be a lerp from min push force to max based upon the push charge progress. So it allows us to ramp up the force that's going to be applied. Then I can add force to that target. So I can go, okay, well, target RB, add force, and I need to work out the direction. So again, the thing that's going to, although we have a weapon and an anchor there, the thing that's going to be typically most intuitive for the player is if it's based upon where they're looking. That's going to be the most intuitive thing there. Multiplied by our push force, and then we have our push force mode. That's good. That will do that launching of it. So now we can actually wire up a couple of things that we need to, because our gravity gun, we need to wire up the anchor. Target mask, we can switch that just to gravity gun targets. And we want our charge display. So we've already got our HUD canvas, so we can add in our text. And this will be our charge progress. Trying to make sure we've got enough space for this saying 100%. And we'll anchor this down the bottom right. I think will work well. And I might actually put in a little bit of a panel for it. Charge progress UI. Make this one where it's darkening the background and darken it a decent amount. Bring that down. So it's just a little bit of things we need to update, but it means that we probably 75, maybe even 100. I want this to be a decent enough size that we can easily sort of see it. And our text goes into there. And so we'll just adjust that so that it's centered and quite a bit larger. That's pretty good. That's fairly, it's nice and visible. We can easily see that. So we can link that up to our gravity gun, to the text, which is great. And that means that text, we'll just make sure we do a quick little clear of it on startup. So charge display dot text is equal to 0%. You might make it blank, so when it's not charging, we don't see anything there for it. That looks pretty good. I'm also going to make that a mathf round to int. So it's just nice integer values. I could use formatting specifiers in there. Would also be a viable thing that I can do with that text. But in this case, a round to int's really easy just to throw in there. So let's test this out. I won't be able to pull things towards me yet, but I should be able to launch stuff. So first let's check. Charge does build up, which is great. So let's do a really low amount of force on this one. So that moves it. Low on this one doesn't move it much, which is what we expect because of the weight. So we need to ramp it up way more. This one, even longer. So we get to 100. And with that, we can see it really doesn't move much because of the weight difference there. So that's where we could adjust the force. So we could make it that the maximum force is a bit higher. And you could also do things where there's like power-ups that supercharge it, things like that. But now what I should find is this gets to 100%. That should move a fair bit more. And it's going to kick it around a bit. It is going to tend to slide just because of the weight of it is going to really sort of hold it towards the ground, which is fine. Whereas if we get something like this, it's going to go scooting along way, way, way more. Or really tiny ones are going to just get thrown off incredibly far in the case of that. So, okay, that's good. Now we want to do the stage of being able to pull something towards us. We know that we can find a target. We know that we can launch it. Now we want to be able to bring a target towards us. So there's different ways of how we can approach this. And it really depends on the type of feel you're going for. And what I'm talking about here is in terms of how the object moves towards you. Because that's something where what you do in a desktop environment would be different to what you would do in VR. So something that, if you've played Half-Life Alyx, really cool thing that they did there is that it takes basically the same amount of time when you grab something and pull it towards you, no matter how far away it is or what it is. And that's the idea being that lets you build up muscle memory for it, which is a really cool idea. And especially in something like VR where there is that aspect you're needing to coordinate of pulling something towards you and then grabbing it out of the air, consistency there matters. It means you can grab stuff the same way we can in real world, where we don't need to be tracking it continually. We just need to track part of it. We can predict where it'll go and grab it. We could do a similar thing here of having it that it has a fixed sort of time. We could have an acceleration. There's lots of different things depending upon the feel that you're wanting to go for. So for now, I'm going to have it be a thing where it takes a fixed amount of time. So we're going to say we'll have a grab time, and I'll start that at like 2. The other thing that can be cool is having a little bit of rotation when it actually is picked up. So I'm going to have a configuration for that, because that way we could set this to 0 to turn it off. So, okay, that's good. We then are going to need a couple of other bits and pieces. One of the things we're going to need, and this is going to seem like, why the hell would we need this, is we're going to actually need the player's collider. Now, I won't initially make use of this, because that will allow me to illustrate the hilarious bug that happens if we don't have the player collider. But we're going to need the player collider, I guarantee it. The other stuff we then need, so we need to keep track of our grab target. We need to keep track of how long we've been pulling that towards us. So grab full time. We need to keep track of the size of the object that we're grabbing. So that allows us to anchor stuff so it's not, a really large object or a really small object, to try and keep them from just sort of embedding into the player. So we want our grab target radius. Again, we don't need to actually give these initial values. They'll be defaulted to 0. I will need the grab target's collider. Again, limited use of what I will do with that to begin with. But again, we'll see why we do actually need that. So, okay, good so far. What I want to then do is, this is going to be tied to our primary. So when we go and try and grab something, what I need to do to begin with is, well, grab target is equal to find target, and this isn't a push. So attempt to find a target. So if we found a target, then what we need to do is we need to retrieve things like of the collider. So that's something where we've got our grab target. We can get the component for the collider. We can grab its radius, which that radius is going to be, we use the collider, its bounds, extents, magnitude. So that's going to give us, whatever the collider is, that's going to give us a rough sort of radius for it, so we're kind of spherizing it. We're going to grab pull time, get set to 0. So prepare for the grab. Now this is something where when we are grabbing something, it's going to be potentially moving faster, so we might want to change its collision mode. So if we were going to do that, here is where we would change its collision mode for while we're doing that physics interaction with it. Can be a very necessary thing. So we've also got our grab torque. If that's not equal to 0, then what I want to do is grab target, add torque, and we're just going to give a random chunk of torque in each axis. From minus grab torque to grab torque. This will just cause it to rotate a little bit, and not super fast, just a little bit of slow rotation as it's moving towards us, just in each axis. We could make that it's only particular axes as well, but this just gives that little bit of sort of rotation, which can look really nice. And that's pretty good for being able to launch it. When we finish grabbing, well, then we need to get rid of our grab target. So what I want to have is f grab target is not equal to null. Then I don't have this function yet, but I want to have a clear grab target. Because when I go to launch something, I might be launching the grab target. because what I could have here is, well, if grab target is not equal to null, then we use grab target as the thing that gets launched. Otherwise, we search for one. Then, afterwards, we need to make sure we clear it because we've launched it, so we don't want to actually have that as a thing anymore. So, okay, that's good. Then what I would do is I need to have my clear grab target, which there's a bunch of things that might need to do, because when we've got that target fully held towards us, we would need to actually, we would have it parented typically. It's going to be easier. So what I would need to do is deparent it. So if grab target transform.parent is equal to our anchor point, then grab target transform, and we clear the parent. So we set parent to null. So we deparent if necessary. The other final things that we then do is grab target is equal to null, and grab target collider is also equal to null. So clear the target. So that's good. So we can clear it, we can reset it when we're actually done with stuff. And as I said, that's really important for us being able to do that, because we really want to make sure that we don't keep around that target when we're sort of done. So that's good. We can do that. We don't have it moving towards us yet, but we'll be able to do that. The one thing I will do is I will actually move the clearing, so it's deparented, things like that, up into here, just so that it's something where before we apply any force, it's been fully separated. So fixed update, then we can check if we have a grab target. So this would be an else, because if we're doing a push, charging a push, we don't want to be grabbing a grab target. So otherwise, if we've got a grab target, then we need to move it towards us. And so, okay, for moving it towards us, we know we're wanting it to take a specific amount of time. So we'd be checking actually, not just if it's not equal to null, but if it's not equal to null and the grab pull time is less than the grab time. So in other words, if we are not at the point where we've fully captured it yet. So what we then do is we update our grab pull time. So grab pull time, we add in time.delta time. We check, is it fully grabbed? So if grab pull time is greater than or equal to grab time, then what we need to do is we need to stop the target. So grab target velocity, we set that to 0. We take that target and we set the position to be our anchor's position. So our anchor point position, we're going to parent it. So grab target, transform set parent to the anchor point. And we're also, because we don't want it to be getting knocked around by other things at this point then, we're also going to set it to be kinematic, which means when we clear the grab target, what we also need to do is grab target is kinematic, goes to false. So we turn off being able to apply forces to it, parent it, zero out its velocity, so it's going to be nicely locked in that position there. If we wanted to, you could not have it be kinematic, but then that means it is going to be more able to be knocked around. That's just something to be aware of. Otherwise, we're moving towards it. So what we do is our time to anchor is going to be our grab time minus the grab pull time, which I might actually rename that to current grab time. It's just going to make it a little bit clearer. So then our velocity is going to be, well, I know the position that I'm trying to move it towards, so anchor point dot position minus its current location. So grab target, transform position. So that gives me the distance. I divide that by our time to anchor, that gives me a speed. So it's going to move at a constant speed towards it. So that's pretty good. Now it's not going to anchor at exactly the right point that I want it to, and that's okay. And it's also because there's a couple of things I intentionally have not done, it's going to be a little bit interesting in its interaction with the player. It'd be likely fine for a small object. So I pick a small one, you can see it moves towards, and that's good. Then we can drop it, or I can move it towards us and then charge up for launching it, and then launch it. So, okay, good for a small object. What about a medium one? And you'll notice that moved me. And as we can see in this case, that moved me a lot. Not actually sure even how far off the player is in this case, but pretty far off. Yeah, a few kilometers away. So this is where linking in that collider for the player comes in. So we link in, so we've got the player collider, so that's good. And then what we do is when we start grabbing a target, we can tell the physics system, hey physics, ignore collisions between the grab target collider and the player collider. And we specifically just say, yep, ignore these. Then when we have our clearing of the grab target, again, we tell it not to ignore collisions. So re-enable collisions. And then here, turn off collisions with the player. So it means it still collides with everything else, but it means it won't collide with us. So that will help. The other thing that we can do is we want to, because we're getting that radius, we want to actually offset where it tries to anchor. So this is a case where I'd often use a property, because this makes it just a little bit easier. So our anchor position, what that is going to be is that is our anchor point dot position plus our anchor points forward multiplied by the grab target radius. So it means it's always going to push it that little bit away, which is great. It means the big objects won't end up embedded within us. It's going to keep things at sort of safe distance away. That means our lock position here changes, and it means our target location for moving towards also changes. So let's test it with that. This should now no longer launch us off into the ceiling, things like that. And should also mean then, regardless of the object, it sort of always hovers a bit of a similar distance away. And we can see that hasn't gone and messed with our movement, which is good. Now it can, when you do stuff like that, can still move you around because this can collide with other things. You could fully turn off collision, or you could selectively choose what stuff it is going to interact with. But the key thing is, we can now launch this. And in particular, if we use the smaller objects, then we get that nice little bit of rotation on them, which looks cool. We can just send them flying. We could adjust that speed, so the grab time there. So if we wanted it to be something pretty quick, could drop it down to like 1 second. It's going to bring it towards us much, much faster. So with that, that feels pretty good. And that's staying with us as we're moving around. But we have a functional gravity gun. We could change bits in terms of like how it charges up there. We could change stuff so we've got things where after a certain charge it auto fires. Lots of little bits like of that we could very easily add to it if we wanted to. The key thing is we've got our functional gravity gun working that we can, it's not fairly self-contained, could throw it into any projects, doesn't require much in the way of setup on the targets that can be gravity gunnable. It's really them having a rigid body on them. So that makes it really quick and easy for being able to integrate it into a project. Thanks folks, I hope you found the video helpful. If you're looking for the code for the project, that's available up on GitHub, and I've put the link for that in the description below. You can freely use this code for any of your own projects, whether they're commercial or non-commercial, you're able to use it for any of those. If you've got questions, chuck in a comment below. If you want to submit them for another Q&A video, then the link for that you'll find in the description. If you have found the video helpful, please chuck in a like and subscribe. It's something that's really appreciated, really helps out. And if you're looking for other ways to support the channel, then I do have a Patreon and you'll find the link for that in the description below as well. But until next time, bye.